It's time for something brief. Dead Cells is an action platformer Metroidvania roguelike that quickly became my favorite game of last year. If I were judging the game on that pithy description alone, it would have been lost in a sea of indie titles I didn't have time for. But when I saw Dead Cells, I believed it. This game in motion is a ballet of agility and violence unfolding before your very eyes. Its inspired Disney's Aladdin meets gory slasher flick look is fresh. If you're like me and not really interested in action side-scrollers, Dead Cells still stands head and shoulders above the competition. Mechanically, it works for three huge reasons. Number 1, it moves. One of Motion Twin's first priorities was making movement and combat satisfying by refining the game's animation, platforming, and action into a buttery smooth, seamless joy for the eyes and fingers. Even watching it in motion isn't enough. Getting your literal hands on this game and moving through its environments elicits a giddiness that I haven't felt since playing Assassin's Creed, whose buttery smooth parkour made that series what it is. Enemies explode into gibs and demonic flame, and your pseudo 2D immortal avatar leaps, slams, and slashes without a hitch. Other visual effects really nail the impact you have on your enemies and the world around you. You play a disembodied head who, at the beginning of each run, drips down into the prisoner's quarters and embodies a new body. As you wander through this colorful world, you find scraps and artifacts of a story about a mutating plate called the Malaise that has fallen over this island. The game doesn't really need a story, but there you go. Number 2. You grow. The last roguelike I put a bunch of time into was 2015's Enter the Gungeon. As much as I loved it, it never felt like I was progressing. I was unlocking tons and tons of wildly creative guns, but few were more powerful than any other, and there weren't many permanent upgrades. Dead Cells takes the opposite tack. Like any roguelike, the whole point is to die over and over and carry that progress between playthroughs. Here you feel progress as your weapon selection expands and improves in quality. By defeating minor bosses, you acquire runes to access previously unreachable sections of the game's randomly generated levels. Along the way, more modes and options become available to play, including a daily challenge that grants exclusive blueprints to throw Dead Cells at. Speaking of which, collecting the game's titular currency from defeated enemies and cashing it in between levels reinforces the notion that you're on a progression treadmill and building to something great even within each run. As you collect and unlock new powers, weapons, and abilities, they appear in a sea of hanging jars in the game's opening chamber that visually dignifies your hard work. If you get bored cleaning out every last enemy and glowing gimme from every level, the game encourages you to take up speedrunning. There are things you miss along the way, sure, but plenty of rewards unlock between levels if you can get through them quickly enough, and they generally make up for it. Number 3, it's fair. Dead Cells is a fair game. Every hit, injury, and death you suffer is your fault, and it feels great. For example, you can walk past enemies and not take damage. When an enemy does attack, they have a tell indicating what they're going to do, how powerful it'll be, and where you need to stand or roll to avoid them. Obviously, this requires some experience and memorization, but even the spike hazards have a logic to them that makes the game's difficulty a product of hubris or ignorance rather than arbitrary harm from the game itself. It creates a notion that success is based on doing better next time rather than being at the mercy of RNG. Motion Twin has been constantly tweaking and improving the game since it entered early access in 2017. Dead Cells is also the first game I've had the pleasure of playing that was produced by an anarcho-syndical workshop cooperative. If you're not familiar with the French developer's lengthy resume of mobile and browser games, you'd be in the same boat as me, even though they've been around for nearly 20 years. Each of Motion Twin's 10 to 15 employees gets paid the exact same and has the exact same amount of say in each game's development. There are no bosses. It's not a structure that could work for many game developers, but in an era of 100-hour-a-week crunches ahead of a release and massive corporate strategies steering games towards chintzy monetization, Motion Twins and Dead Cells are equally interesting surprises.